recording of a keynote given to medical professionals.
To welcome Justin Caffrey to our MDCA webinar this evening. The backdrop for this is an awareness of problems and the reality of problems around things like mental health, substance abuse, depression, and even suicide among medics. So I thought it would be interesting for Justin to present to the MDCA this evening. Justin's had a really successful career in business and completely changed track to become a high performance coach. And Justin works with elite operators in business, sport, and in other sectors as well. I've had the pleasure of working together with Justin, and I derived huge benefit from his no nonsense approach, is how I'd put it. One of the things that Justin liked to say to me frequently was, John, nobody is coming to save you. And I think that the underlying message for a lot of that was that if people in our line of work and under the sort of pressures that we're under want to make things better for ourselves, then we must empower ourselves to make those changes ourselves. Justin's the type of person who can help us with that. So I'll hand you over to Justin so he can throw more light on that and talk you through his approach. And Justin, many thanks for being here this evening. It's hugely appreciated.
Thanks, John. And hi, everybody. And thanks for the opportunity to talk with you all this evening. I think the point that John made in terms of what I do, I guess in many ways, I either work with private clients or I'm retained by corporates to come in and work with people who are struggling in whatever way, shape, or form. It's either their leadership style, it's their business approach, or it's managing how they deal with adversity, stress, and challenge. And I think it can often be a mismatch that we believe that just because we're a professional, because we operate in a certain environment, we should have all the answers. And in reality, none of us do. And I was working today with a senior leadership team of a global bank, and we collectively agreed that it's fair to say that no matter how far we move up in the ladder in terms of business and success, the more we're able to open up to our peers and say we're all just kind of winging it at the best of times, the easier it is for everybody to feel safe and to feel supported and to be in this kind of community as well. So it's important to be around peers and to have that sense of shared understanding in terms of how you manage your business, your approach to your own mental health and your physical health. And I really want to talk today about some of the simple things that I use, and I don't want to talk for too long. I think I'm a way better coach than I am a speaker. So I'll start with that. But I want to just talk a little bit about an example. I'm going to walk through a client, give you a little bit of insight about my experience. But I think starting with this quote from Viktor Frankl, who wrote A Man's Search for Meaning, which is a phenomenal read. Everything can be taken from man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own story. It's critical to understand that everything that we face is choice-based, and we're pre-designed to choose the lesser of the two options. We'll always want to move to the idea that is a little bit easier and a little bit less challenging. And as John will know, and many clients who work with me, I'm all about do the right things quickly in order to avoid the challenges further down the road. So lean into the difficulty. We put off the difficult conversation, we put off the difficult client, we put off the difficult employee, we put off the difficult conversation with a shareholder or a business partner. And every time we put stuff off, we just put it under the rug, and every time you walk back into the room, you'll fall over it. So moving quickly to the problem avoids the challenge and the stress attached to the inevitability of not dealing with it quickly. And just going to quickly run through some ideas, but I'm going to talk about breathing. Why is that important? What have I learned over 8 years? Why should I even be talking about it? It's probably a better idea, given the learned company I'm in. The upside of trauma. I think trauma is fantastic if you use it right. There's no downside. If you allow life to consume you, it will. You can also consume life, choices. Lessons from my time living with samurai monks. We'll also look at what it's like to create some spaciousness, just simple ideas around accountability and action steps. But then we'll go to questions to see what resonates and how everybody feels. I suppose I'm going to talk a little bit about a client experience, and this client, Bernard, who is a very real example and somebody who's happy for me to use his name as well. But why me? Why do I want to talk about it? I went to London when I was 19. I worked in banking, had a very successful career. By the time I was 23, I left, set up my own boutique practice, built a very successful business, sold my business in 2008, 2007. During that period of time, I had a very significant interest in horse racing, won races at Royal Ascot, Galway races, Queen Mary Stakes in Royal Ascot. We had the champion racehorse on Dundalk track. We went to the Vi Cup. All the kind of trappings and lovely things that we want to have in life. And from an early age, I think I was 24, I was driving my first 911. So the abundance of wealth was something that I was finding quite easy to navigate. But I come from poverty. I come from a different environment where I grew up, I went to school in Ballymun when I was in primary school. I went to a very tough Christian Brother school in Whitehall from my secondary school. And I had a really challenging and traumatic experiences in my childhood growing up. And they eventually would have an imprint. But I was able to use the power of adversity to help me drive and be successful. And it works for a time, and it has, like a rocket firing into outer space, there is this immense power of adversity that allows us to propel ourselves forward. But equally, it starts to wane a little bit at times. And after you kind of get through Earth's atmosphere and now you're in outer space, you have to kind of adapt and think about something differently. So through my 20s, it was really successful. I got married, we had our first child. But 5 years prior to his arrival, my sister's son died. And he died at 18 months old of meningitis. And that was my first experience of trauma and how it kind of took over this idea in my mind. And it left me with this indelible print of fear around the death of a child. So our first child was born. I was really concerned about him. He was born with cleft lip and palate, and he had first surgery when he was 3 months old, and has lived a life of multiple surgeries ever since. And to be frank, I was very pragmatic. We were like, okay, that's cool. We're okay with that. We'd gone through an initial challenge, but after that, we were just, okay, let's be pragmatic, let's move on. Then we had 3 or 4 miscarriages. Our second child was born. And just before his first birthday, he died. So the thing that left an indelible print on my mind and showed me how such a chasm can be created in a family and people's lives through the death of a child, the thing that I'd kind of fixated on and worried about, here it is. You have it now. And after my son Joshua died in 2010, I went back to what it was that keeps me sane and alive, and that was work, and I immersed myself in it. And I kind of ignored the grief for quite a few years, and then it kind of caught up with me. And I had a panic attack in 2014. I didn't even know what they were. Big journey followed, and here I am. So, my backstory is, yes, built and sold 4 different businesses in different sectors, worked in private equity. But the most interesting thing for me was learning to understand who I am and why do I react the way that I do. And if I think about, you know, the nature of our experiences, and the key thing that I'm really interested in is, I thought I'd just share an idea of what it's like when somebody comes to work with me, whether they're somebody in the professional field or it's a CEO in an organization. My first thought is to sit with them and kind of observe, how are they breathing? Because so much can be explained just by watching somebody's approach to how they regulate their nervous system through breathing. And I've come at this from both an understanding of an approach that goes back 1500 years in Japan, and then looking at the neuroscience, the biology, and then simple things like the fight and flight response. When should it be on? When should it be off? And if I take an example here, Bernard, who's a client, a business leader. So he showed up, we're on a Zoom call like this, runs a very successful company, built a very impressive brand, sits in front of me and talks to me about the fact that, you know, he's not able to focus as clearly as he wants. He wants to have more stellar focus. He wants to build more resilience. He wants to have a better understanding of how to make clear and concise decisions. So he's talking, and as I'm watching him, I can see that he is sighing. So interesting, plenty of sighs going on. Talks about the problems in his world. I see him sighing. I notice that he's not actually breathing through his nose. He's constantly sucking air in through his mouth. And he's all over the place in terms of his communication. I don't mean anything that, you know, a sane or normal rational person would find disconcerting, but because I'm really observing him, I can watch that his eyes are moving left and right and left and right. So I can think, okay, looks like he's in the sympathetic state, looks like he's in fight and flight. So the nervous system's looking for the exit door. It's highly stimulated in the way that he's breathing. So I want to get more clarity about what's really going on. So I say to him, look, just let's slow down the breathing here for a second. And I just want him to adapt his breathing. So I suggest that he tries to just breathe through his nose for a couple of minutes, close his mouth. Let's try and down regulate. Simple exercise, just breathe in slowly through your nose for 4 seconds and breathe out really slowly for 6 seconds. And in particular, emphasizing the slow exhale. And often I'll get the question, but why does it matter how I'm breathing? The one thing I'll always say is, if somebody comes bursting into my door right now in my office, I'm not going to respond with a deep inhale through my nose. I'm going to respond with a... And the thing that I've noticed for 8 years is that people who are dysregulated are excessively breathing in through their mouth. So say, breathe through your nose. Let's just slow down your breathing, help them to shift into the parasympathetic state. And as that happens within 3, 4, 5 minutes, I'm now dealing with a different Bernard. I'm now dealing with a Bernard who is not plugged into his amygdala, who's not talking to me about why his life is so stressful. I just get a glimpse for a moment of Bernard's prefrontal cortex. The smart guy who's built the business, who has the success and the family and everything else. So now I know, aha, this is who I'm speaking to. And in that moment, we have an opportunity to commune and just get an insight as to what is actually going on. So we start with a very simple technique, accessing how we communicate in terms of our internal messaging system. And when I was having a panic attack, which I had in a board meeting, and nobody in my board meeting noticed that I was having a panic attack, and I didn't even know what a panic attack was at the time. But to give you an insight of the way my mind was working, I thought, well, maybe it's a heart attack or a stroke. but it doesn't seem like a really bad one because I haven't fallen over yet. So I can probably still get through the order of business and get everything that I need over the line and not have to alert any of my board members or somebody who was also a shareholder that there's a problem. This went on for 20 minutes. And eventually came to the point where my left side became completely numb and I had to hold my left hand with my right hand in front of my coffee cup just to still engage with people. My peripheral vision shut down, cold sweat, the whole lot. No idea what was going on, but I thought, I just need to get through it. So later on in the years that followed, I really went all the way back to that moment. And I really went into the panic attack and I wanted to know what was I doing. And I went, wow, that's really interesting. I'm over breathing. I'm taking in high levels of oxygen, as you guys all know, and I'm heavily oxygenating my blood. So I'm increasing the adrenaline and cortisone and all of the sympathetic responses. And I started to notice, okay, if we slow that down, what is the opposite of over breathing? It's under breathing. It's really subtly breathing. So even in the midst of extreme stress, how do we really subtly breathe? And I went and lived with samurai monks in Japan, as you do. And one of the things that I learned with them, which ultimately they actually gave to the Navy SEALs, is the idea that in the midst of battle, you reconnect with your breath through your nose, you slow down your nervous system, and you bring your smart brain into play so that you become strategic. In the West, we've learned that in the last 10 years, and in professional sport, which I work with a lot of athletes, it's something that's playing out quite a bit now. And there's actually some of the elite marathon runners who now just run nasal breathing because we increase nitric oxide, we lower our blood pressure, and we can improve endurance. So lots of benefits. And then we're kind of open up to, okay, you're here, what's going on? And in this particular situation, Bernard, really successful, really dynamic, but was starting to be like that rocket that had gone into outer space. The thruster had fired off, but now he was losing his momentum, and there was a distinct possibility that he was going to fall back into orbit without any capacity to manage it. So we started to look at, okay, what's going on? Where are you at? What's happened recently? And the thing that I've always learned, and what I learned through the experience of Joshua's death, is there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. Joshua was the straw that broke my camel's back. I was holding it all together really effectively. And from the outside, it looked great. But I was a workaholic. It was probably, medicating with alcohol. I wasn't addicted to it, but it was definitely there. And I used to believe that I was addicted to stress. And I tell people I really enjoy stress. But Joshua's death was the ground shaking moment that really was going to shake my world up. And I've learned again that sometimes for a lot of us, there's these moments that really impact us, and they may not have happened yet. And that's not a case that we need to find them. We can actually be preventative rather than trying to retrospectively cure. But I said to Bernard, what's going on? What's happened, man? Oh, well, I'm really into cycling, and I got into a car crash, big impact, damaged my hip, damaged my leg. I now have to walk with a limp, and I can't ride my bike anymore. And that was the kind of thing that held me together. And as a consequence, I'm now feeling pretty much out of control, overwhelming thoughts of self-doubt, hopeless, helpless at times, et cetera, but still, managing to persuade the crowd that he was in good shape, but got an opportunity to open up and talk about it. And as we spend our time together, as we did over quite a few weeks after that, we go into, well, okay, where does the catalyst come from? And it comes from a good family, a very respectable family, a very wealthy upbringing. So, no poverty, scarcity, et cetera, but has an incredibly demanding father who put extraordinary pressures on his shoulders to succeed. And not even directly putting the pressures on, but actually almost through osmosis, seeing this happening around him and his sibs and his dad and how all that plays out. And Bernard not being able to realize that a momentum has started way back then, and there's a thought process in his head that's built up. And his dad, who died 10 years before I met him, is not there anymore, even asking the questions. But he's never slowed down enough just to notice, what's the stimulus? Why all this? What's going on? So we know that the bite breaks is the straw that breaks the camel's back, but what's the why? And it can often be with high-performing people. Do I really want to go back? Do I really want to have to deal with, what happened in the past? I don't know if I really need to get into that. Thanks very much. And that was most definitely the case for me, because I'm a big believer, and I still am, that, when you're going through hell, the best thing to do is just keep going. But if you understand how your rocket is fueled in the first place, and you're floating a little bit in orbit, then you can do some repairs and then re-engineer the ship to either bring you back down or keep on going, go to the moon and beyond. So we can actually learn and understand why these behaviors created a way for us to operate. And it's painful because we have to go and look at it. But as the slide there says, you can bounce back from anything. And as we got Bernard close to that pain and that reality, and we got him to find a sense of understanding of it, he was then able to start to understand, okay, when I'm about to make a decision, is this the really logical, smart part of my brain? Or am I reacting to a memory from my past? And I say that because what I've discovered is our survival mechanism is fantastic, but it's a bit dumb as well. So when we encounter something traumatic, like my nephew died, my nervous system goes, broad base approach. Every child that you ever might have is another potential child who can die. And I'm a very unfortunate person who I did actually receive that. However, I could be still receiving that now. I have a 16-year-old, I have a wife and a very good relationship. So I could be caught in this perpetual state of, well, everybody's going to die. To back to John's point, nobody is ever going to come and save me. I have to understand, why am I making some of these decisions, and what is the cognitive thought process that's getting me there? So if we delve into the why, and we help Bernard understand that so much of his decisions is about trying to compete against his sibs, or to show his dad, who's not here anymore, why he's so good, and instead re-engineer his life for himself, different space, very different space. And that doesn't have to be at the behest of what it is that got him to the point of being able to launch the rocket ship in the first place. I didn't want to lose my tenacity, my unrelenting skill to drive and push agendas. And when I went to live with the samurai, this was some of the really interesting approaches that these monks had maintained exactly the same practice and way of living for 1600 years. They live inside a philosophical approach to life called Shigendo, which is a kind of a mix of Buddhism and other esoteric practices in Japan. But we arrive there, we have to give up our watches, our phones, we have to give up all connection to the outside world. We have to wear these very specific traditional clothes, not like our friend here in body armor, but if you take off the armor, we're kind of wearing all the rest of that stuff. And we're not allowed to speak for 5 days, 6 days in total. The only word you're allowed to speak when you're in training is "Kedamo," which means I accept. And if at any point you can't say "Kedamo," then go home, easy. You go home, bye-bye. I was interested in this philosophy because it was really starting to align with a lot of what I was learning about myself. And we're also being brought to a point where we are more or less starved for 5 days, which, really appealing. I'm sure a lot of people are really excited about that idea. But we get practically no food. We get access to water. And when I say practically no food, you get like a rice bowl in the morning and you can just eat that in a minute and then you're out. We're hiking for 10 hours at night. They wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning and bring us out hiking and maneuvers at all hours. No eye contact, sleeping on the floor of the most basic hut with just a blanket, no pillow. And you're exposed to the rawest elements of yourself. But it teaches you to go and search deeply inside you as to, well, how can I respond here? How can I manage this? And when you're tired and dejected, they're going to be screaming at you in your face in Japanese, and you want to just tell them where to stick it. But they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and started to learn, wow, there's more in the tank, there's more in the tank, there's more in the tank. But constantly re-engaging with that idea that the only person who can get through this is me, and nobody else is going to come and save me. I can stop at any moment, or I can continue. That's my only option. And we're in meditation, we're learning how to be with that. When we're tired and dejected, we're constantly being brought into extremely cold waters, the Shonai Mountains. This is the place where the last samurai was shot in Japan. The Shonai Mountains are created in a way that obscures this whole area from the rest of Japan, and the conditions are harsh. And when you sign a disclaimer with the Japanese and it says you might fall off a cliff and die, or you might be killed by a black bear, you really might fall off a cliff and die, and you might really be killed by a black bear. But they constantly condition you. Don't respond, don't look, don't communicate. When we were going down through some really extreme hikes at pace, people would fall, people would do their ankle, they'd fall over. You're not allowed to pick up your client, your colleague. You're not allowed to look at them. You're not allowed to give them a hand. They just figure it out. If they want to, put their hand up and tap out, they can tap out, but do not help them. And this process worked really well in an extraordinarily painful way. But what was interesting was, I think it was maybe the penultimate day or night, we'd been out hiking for 10 or 12 hours up the second highest mountain in Japan, came back, thought we were resting, and about 2 hours into sleep, they wake us up. No idea again of time or orientation. They bring us out, we're walking for about 45 minutes, and then there's a sign at the front to stop. We're carrying little Japanese lanterns. And the master who was running the whole show was calling for a lamp to be sent forward. So lamps got sent up, and these were literally actual lanterns got sent up to the front. And we didn't know what was going on, but nobody would speak because we knew not to. And we were very much in military maneuvers at this moment. And this really small Japanese man who was about 5 foot tall now has this tiny little lamp. And we see that he's standing there, and he's about 10 foot away from me, and he holds up this lantern, and he just keeps lifting up and up and up and up. And then we see that he's holding it up, and right in front of him is a 10-foot black bear on its hind legs with its paws up, and it's pretty scary. But what was astounding was nobody flinched or moved or spoke or did anything. And this wasn't like a theatrical bear that they bring in. You may or may not encounter one of these in the mountains, but we all just stayed where we were. And we're kind of thinking, well, what happens now? Like, the bear could just kill us all in a second. And we waited to see what would happen. And the master put his hand onto a little bell, which he carried. And we all wondered, what's this bell for? And he lifted up this little bell, and he put it to the bear's face. And he rang the bell. And as he rang the bell a couple of times, the bear responded and came down onto his front feet, paused, and walked off. Now, we couldn't talk, and we couldn't talk for another 2.5 days. We never got to actually ask anything at that moment. And I'm sure, like my colleagues, I was left with that thought all night. But what I found astounding was, and I can talk about it in the Q&A if anybody wants to ask questions about it. What I found astounding afterwards was, here is a creature that has been hearing this bell for 1,500 years. And they know that when they hear it, it's okay. So the bear was in the sympathetic response. Who's in my territory? I'm not happy. But he hears something that regulates his nervous system and realizes there's no threat. And he pops down and off he goes. So the bear was learning how to respond. We were learning how to respond. And the other really impactful Viktor Frankl quote that is absolutely critical to my work is, there is a space between the initial stimulation and your subsequent response to that initial stimulation. And in that space is where you find your freedom. So in that moment, we're in the most extreme scenario where I'm thinking we might die, but we're all focusing on controlling how we breathe, staying completely static and being non-reactionary. And the consequence is we created the space between the stimulation and our subsequent response to stimulation, and the pain goes. That works in every other facet of life. The person who can still trigger me the most in my life is my 89-year-old mother. So, I use that practice when she sends me a text, because she is able to text 89, or she says something triggering, and I still remember, okay, let me just make sure how I'm breathing here. So that I remember that you're 89, I'm 48, and I don't need to think about being 16 or 15. I need to be present to what's going on in this moment and breathe. Just as we do when we get a text from a difficult client or business partner, etc., etc., etc. Because cultivating the space to respond a little bit differently is where we change everything. And preparing for uncertainty is critical, because everything is uncertain. Life is uncertain. No matter what happens, and John can advocate to this, I don't come along and say, I'll help you improve everything that's happened in the past. I want to help you manage what's coming in the future, because it will always be hard. Stuff will always go wrong. But we can prepare ourselves for that challenge. And it's through the consistency of small things, like using cold water. If you go swimming or you use cold showers, my routine in the morning is always the same. It's always baked in. 10 to 12 minutes of meditation as soon as I wake up. I'll immediately go, I don't need to do this. I've been doing this for 8 years. I don't need to. I feel great today. My nervous system wants comfort. It doesn't want discomfort. But I go, not going to listen to you. So I drop in, I do some meditation. I get out of bed, I want to do some stretching now. 4 or 5 minutes. My nervous system goes, I don't need to do stretching. We stretch every day. I think I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to do stretching. I then want to do 25 push-ups. It's just hard enough. It's not grueling. My nervous system definitely goes, you do push-ups all the time. You don't need to do that. We're in a hurry. Got to go to a meeting. I ignore that. I do the push-ups. I finish that by going into the shower. I turn on the shower. I look at the cold water. I think this is going to be cold. My nervous system goes, you don't need to do that. Turn on the hot water. And this could be quite nice. I meet the cold water. My body meets the cold water. It lasts a couple of minutes. Boom, I'm out of it. Every time I complete a task that my nervous system doesn't want me to do, I get a huge reward for, I think, I met adversity, stepped into it, and got it done. Because adversity, as you all know, is coming for you at speed. And the faster we learn to manage it and the more consistent we get at managing it throughout our day, the better we are prepared to manage the big ones when it comes. So we practice to be in a position to manage what goes on. And simple steps, focus on how we breathe. How do we regulate ourselves in a moment? If you're in a stressful meeting, notice that if you just switch how you breathe and slow it down, you can change what's going to come out of your mouth. Your fight and flight response will usually produce something that's generally quite litigious in dealing with matters of business or employees or business partners. So being able to slow down your breathing and realize the thing that I want to actually fire in my mouth is like an exocet missile that will be better off. Breathe, slow down. Facing the pain, step into it, meet the pain anyway. Deal with the challenges of the past. Learn what it is that fires your rocket from all those years back. All the things that we don't deal with our life are like tin cans attached to our back. We're constantly trying to move along, hoping to get away from the stuff that I don't think about, but it keeps rattling like hell behind me. Eventually, at some point, it's worth just sitting down and going, all right, let's have a look at this. Let's get really close to it. And just like I managed the death of my son, when I got really close to it, I was able to realize I can't change it. He has died, and I can't change that. What I can change is my response to his death and what I can learn about me and how I can then be a better version of him and do something in his memory. Seeing life just as it is. Don't try and bend it into a distorted state of how you want it to be. Deal with the tough stuff when it arrives. Don't put it away. Lean into it. Lean into the difficulty, radical acceptance of whatever's going on, and just own it, because it is so effective in terms of how you use your time, rather than putting it on a long finger and then allowing it to just come back around like a boomerang and whack you in the back of the head. And just being open to the idea of continuous improvement and practices. So getting yourself to a point where you just spend 20 minutes a day just stressing the system, so that the system knows winter is coming. Let's get ready. And when we're in a position to be able to manage winter, we're in a position to be able to excel as humans, business people, parents, whatever label we want to hold on to. So I know it's late, and that was, I don't know, 35 minutes. So I will stop talking now and see if that landed, if that resonated, if anybody's got any questions.
Justin, thank you. Really appreciate that on a Tuesday evening. Really appreciate your time and those like fascinating insights. And I think just a view on all of this that I think is potentially very new to a lot of our members and to some of the people who've attended here this evening. I'll just look and see if there's anything in the Q&A in a moment. Question I have for you is, I know I've probably asked you this a few times, but how do we, as I think it's reasonable for us to describe ourselves as, high-level operators or performers. How do we make the distinction between the drive to be good at our job, to be focused, to be professional, to deliver over and over, to have high standards, to not make mistakes, versus the thing that I certainly learned in my training, which was the constant self-recrimination, negative speak, self-effacement, self-punishment, all dressed up as the need to deliver and do a good job for our patients, but in the end, just hugely negative and toxic and corrosive to our own, ability to perform and to our own health and mental health. How do we make that distinction?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And one of the things that I found when I went and spent time and years in Eastern philosophy and psychology, which predates Western psychology by nearly 2,000 years. The question is, well, who is the voice? And I remember somebody said that to me once, like, who is the voice? And I mean, who is the voice? I'm the voice. But I can be talking now, and there's still a voice that wants to kind of interject and say, what are you doing? I'm sitting here talking. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be off the screen. Who are these people who want to listen to you? So again, it's choice related, right? So the tape, the voice is often created. It's like, where does the rocket fuel come from? Like, at some point, somebody said to you, you're not good enough. Somebody told you that it's not going to work out. Somebody pushed you hard, and you took that adversity to build and to drive and to become the person that you are. But the voice that was there still rests and sits. And I think the statistic is 68,000 thoughts a day, and 95% of them are negative. So we're built for seek shelter, get some food, procreate, move the human race forward. Everything else that we've added to that is trying to be highly sophisticated 21st century humans, but we're still in this bag of flesh that's as capable of what it was doing 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. It hasn't really had a significant upgrade. So it's focusing on survival, and it wants you to always stop. And the smart ones push through. But when you push through, you have to know how to still manage the adversity, because 95% of the population are sitting at home watching whatever's on now. Is it Coronation Street or whatever is going on right now? And that's a choice that people make because they choose to take the action, which is take shelter, don't take many risks. So when you take the risks and when you push on, know that everything in your psyche is going to tell you not to do it. But that's what separates, I think, the people who are listening and everybody else. Can't hear you, John.
I thought I unmuted it. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, it's a huge challenge. I think it's one that I think people in our line of work really need to consider carefully. I know certainly personally, for a long time, what drove me was the fear of screwing up, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of error, and the fear of recrimination that came with that. And that was very, that was kind of the theme of training, certainly in surgery, on my way through. And in a way, it got me where I am, and it made me, good, and it made me someone who delivered under pressure. But there's a price then for some of that, and there's a reckoning, I think, that can come. And that's probably, I think, the message that I wanted to get through to our membership who are here this evening, to consider that. So Sharon Moss has put through a question there.
Just to say on that,
Yeah.
point to close, that why do I meditate and why do my clients meditate? Because it creates the space to slow down, to discern the difference between reacting to the voice and pausing to notice what the voice is saying and choosing how to react. That's why it's a high performance behavior. It's not a woo-woo out there, like way smarter people than us have been doing this effectively for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Why? Because it just distills life for a moment so that we can make sensible choices.
And that quote from Viktor Frankl is crucial, I think, to understanding it, that concept of the space between the stimulus and the reaction, that moment where we can choose the choice. And certainly personally, as somebody who's very reactive, that's probably, my biggest challenge in my life, professionally at least. Sharon Moss asked a question: what's the difference between the kind of coaching you offer and counseling? Is it a similar process?
So I trained as a therapist. I took a master's in mindfulness-based interventions. But I'm a pretty intense human being. And I'm only really interested in alphas. So people who come work with me who want to be counseled, that's a really fantastic space to be held in terms of managing what's going on and helping you maybe step in a slightly different direction. My interest is your rocket is just not necessarily still firing on all engines. How do we get it back and refocus on your trajectory? So I'm not very good at working with people who are not very good at doing the exercises, the work, and leaning into the difficulty in terms of big conversations. Counseling is fantastic, but I guess, John, you can probably speak to some of the times that we'd have conversations. It doesn't mean like I'm, an unpleasant human being, but there's nowhere to hide, and we need to deal with what's happening right now so we can take big actions.
Well, I'll certainly attest to that. I mean, that's what I meant when I said that you have a no nonsense approach. And I think the point was that you were challenging me, and I think you probably challenge your people you work with to challenge themselves and to
Yeah,
deliver, as you said to me many times, get up, show up, and do the work. So, as you said there, also there's nowhere to hide in that sort of paradigm. And I'm interested in the idea of referring to, a group like us as alphas. I'm not sure if everyone here would agree that they are an alpha or not. Um, but I think what is true is that we all put ourselves in a situation that's the types of situations, delivering high quality medical care completely independently with very, very little, if any, backup. Um, you know, that's an alpha environment from my point of view.
sounds pretty risky to me.
And risky for a lot of reasons, I think. Obviously decisions you make, how they affect people, but also how they affect us as the people who make the decisions, and how we live with those decisions and the repercussions of them and what they mean, and how things play out. And that's the reality of dealing with patients, where nothing is predictable and where literally anything can happen at any given moment.
Exactly. And I don't mean alphas in kind of, rah rah Tony Robbins, punch the air type environment, but I mean, you've all made choices that are, deeply challenging. 5% of the population are self-employed, and most businesses fail after 2 years. So if you're still here and you're still running your own business, and if you're still operating outside of the comfort blanket of the medical governmental supports, then I think you'll find you are an alpha. You are choosing to be separated, and you are open to risk. So you will wake up, show up, do the work. It's like, just keep it simple. Keep meeting difficulty in short bursts throughout your day, because difficulty is coming to get all of you. It's coming to get me. It could happen to me again tomorrow. Something tragic could happen. I don't know. So all I can do is be prepared.